This photograph is from a battle outside of Kabul, liberation of Kabul in 2001. There's a number of things going on in this picture, and one of the reasons why it means something to me is it's a life lesson in that I was with Northern Alliance forces who were fighting against the Taliban, and I got caught up in the battle, and I kind of ran into an open plain, myself and several other photographers running with these Alliance soldiers as they were fighting, and they were fighting a completely ragtag group of soldiers, some like actually charging with swords, others with pistols, and some with heavier weapons. And as we sort of rounded a turn in the plain, we hit a hilltop, and the Taliban were on the hilltop, and all of a sudden we were completely open. And as the bullets started raining down on us, myself and Tyler Hicks, another photographer, found refuge in actually a crater left over from earlier bombing by American planes. And as we dived into the crater, so did several other Northern Alliance soldiers. And then there was no way to leave, and we were stuck there. And it was a very difficult situation, and bullets were sort of hitting around us, and we really were kind of just waiting for there to be an RPG or a shell to land in the crater, but we really didn't know what to do. And in fact, actually, there came a time when Tyler and I said to each other, you know, if I'm killed, please tell my family this, and if I'm killed, please tell my family that. And we were really getting ready, prepared to die. We were waiting, and all of a sudden, we looked over at this commander who was just a couple of feet away from us. He started bleeding, and he started choking, and we didn't even hear the incoming bullet. He had been struck by a sniper. And he was looking at us, and we were looking at him, and there was really nothing that we could do. It was happening very fast. And we raised our camera and took a couple of frames and began to try to figure out like how to help him when several of his colleagues decided to pick him up, to carry him out and try to get him to get some sort of medical attention. This probably all happened within 30 or 40 seconds. And amazingly, they were able to pick him up and bring him out, and there was actually no gunfire when they did it. Gunfire started again, raining down around us, and Tyler and I sort of dug deeper into our hole trying to protect ourselves. And then two of the other Afghan soldiers that were still with us in the ditch just stood up and literally walked out. No gunfire whatsoever. And then Tyler and I looked at each other and said, okay, I guess we should try that. And we both got up. We decided to run out. And as we ran out of the hole, we both fell down. And as we did so, the bullets came again, and we sort of went back into the hole. And then we decided to try it again. And this time we got out of the hole, we ran really fast, we sort of serpentined, and as we did that, we could feel the bullets passing us, and we were eventually able to turn back around the corner and get protection. And then we later found out that this commander that we photographed, he died later that day. And so in actuality, we were with him for some of his last moments. And one of the things, like often when I look at this photograph, when other people look at this photograph and they say like, you know, was he okay with you taking photographs in such a painful and poignant moment? And for me, having been with him before and I knew that he was happy that we were there documenting this battle, I felt that he would have been okay with us documenting his last sacrifice for the fight for his country. So in 2005, the conflict in Darfur had been going on for almost 2 years. It was a pretty brutal conflict. It was one which the world was really not paying much attention to. And it really seemed at that time there was no end in sight. And as we look at it today in 2015, we realize that this conflict is still going on, so there was no end in sight. I was very interested in seeing how the continuity of conflict took place, meaning how it would pass from one generation to the other. I decided to go and do a project about the children of Darfur, to understand what they were thinking, what was happening, what chances there were to kind of stop the conflict from continuing to their generation. So I proposed to UNICEF to do a project, and one of the reasons I proposed it to UNICEF was that Darfur was a very difficult, and still remains a very difficult place to get access. So by going in with the United Nations, I thought that would enable me to visit a large part of Darfur that I wouldn't be able to do working for a traditional client. And that wound up being true. And so I was able to spend more than a month on the ground documenting the conflict and its effect on children. And one day I was driving probably around 6:30 in the morning, and I saw these three little figures off in the distance of basically the desert at that point, even though we were very close to a displacement camp. And we drove over to explore, and we found three young girls, probably aged at that time. Maybe the oldest was 10, and then the youngest ones were 8 and 9. Started a conversation with them and asked, what were they doing? And the oldest girl explained that they were going off to find firewood for their families. They'd been displaced already by that time for more than a year. The camp that they were living in supplied food, but didn't supply actually any way to cook it. So they had to go off and find firewood. And I looked around and there were no trees anywhere. I said, "Where are you going?" They said, "Oh, we might have to walk 6, 7, 8 hours. It might take us 2 days to get wood." And it became very obvious very quickly why these young girls were going off on this journey that often would probably lead them to being exposed to the Sudanese army where they could be attacked, or the Janjaweed, who are an Arab militia who were known for raping and killing the Darfurians, especially the women. But the reason that they were going and their mother wasn't going was because if their mother went and she was caught or exposed to the Sudanese army, the Janjaweed, for sure she would be raped and killed. The father couldn't go because for sure he would be killed. So the parents were risking that these girls were young enough that they wouldn't be attacked or raped, and sending them off on this very precarious journey. And as I was talking with them, I just lifted my camera up to take a photograph of the older girl. And as I lifted my camera, she sort of bowed her head. And there's a lot of different things going on in this photograph. And I think that one of the things that strikes me the most, that even though she's bowing her head, she's not bowing it in resignation. She's holding herself with such resilience and such dignity that she is essentially there saying that we are still here and we are still fighting. And the way that she's dressed is remarkable. Like if she walked down the streets of New York, people would stop and say, like, "You're dressed beautifully." And here she is, a displaced person, but she's put together in such a way that adds to her body language, and of course the light of the day being just at sunrise. And it's a photograph, I think, that really resonates. And it resonates for me, but it also resonates for people that see this photograph. And so the photograph became a symbol for UNICEF, for their Darfur work. It became part of an exhibition. Amnesty International adopted the photograph also. So she actually, in her way, because of her beauty and the way that she is and what she represents, wound up causing a lot of attention to the conflict and to the plight of children. Money was raised through the selling of the photograph for UNICEF and for Amnesty and so on. And so it's a photograph that, while quiet, has had a large degree of impact on the people's lives in Darfur. I've tried to have UNICEF go back and find her to try to help her. Unfortunately, still to this day, I've not been able to do so, and I've not been able to get a visa to go back to Sudan, but I do hope that at one point we'll be able to find her. So in 2012, the Arab Spring started, and I wasn't able to go to Tunisia, where the birth of the Arab Spring started, but I managed to go to both Egypt and Libya. And in Egypt, I arrived probably about a week or so during the protests against Hosni Mubarak, the then president of Egypt. It was a very unusual situation. The protesters had taken over a main square in the center of Cairo called Tahrir Square, and they were often clashing with security forces or pro-Mubarak protesters. And it was a very interesting kind of conflict. People were coming to the square, listening to speeches, and then they would sort of square off and fight with rocks or sticks in very kind of basic way. And the response often coming back would be with rocks and sticks, and occasionally there would be gunfire as well coming from the pro-Mubarak side. But it was a very interesting thing, like to watch kind of a very old way of fighting, to the point where the anti-Mubarak forces actually built catapults and would put stones in the catapults and send them across to the other side. And then stones would come back. And you know, while stones are not bullets, people were getting hurt and people were getting killed. And so this photograph is from an aid station of a wounded anti-Mubarak protester. And one of the reasons why it resonates with me is obviously there's blood on the hand, the red of the hand, the red of the carpet, this semi-fist that exists but kind of almost being, you don't know if it's between defeat or victory. And also the fact that the carpet itself has a real Mideast feel to it. And I think that also the anonymity of the protester being part of this enormous crowd. I think that it is in some degree representative of the battle that happened in Cairo, and that they eventually became victors for a very short period of time when Mubarak was eventually overthrown. And then today where we are, it just shows now the futility actually of everything that they did. And that's something that's very interesting about photographs. They can have different meanings as events on the ground change. So when the photograph was taken, when the photograph was published, it represented that moment in time when the protesters were victorious. And then months later, and now even years later, several years later today, they've completely lost. They're back under another dictatorship, and it shows the photograph has more of a sign of the futility of the battle of trying to fight against this very big machine that they could really no longer and can no longer overthrow.